Hey everybody, it's Jason Blaha here, and I had someone ask me, hey Jason, is it possible to get too much protein? Are there any long-term health effects to eating some crazy high number, like 400 or 500 grams of protein a day? That's a good question, so let me put on my +5 out of weaponsmithing, work on skill at my crafting a little bit, and let's talk about this. And let's try to be objective with this rather than take anyone's personal bias. I'm not going to go take the bias of vegans, I'm not going to take the bias of bodybuilders. Let's just try to come to some sort of meaningful conclusion here, because the truth is we don't actually have enough data to fully say one way or another if this is a problem, at least in the long term. The reason I say that, we simply do not have any long-term studies where people have been put on extremely high protein diets for a decade or longer. All right, and when I mean extremely high protein diets, we're talking like the 400 plus grams. Like the bodybuilding and fitness community are the only people in the world who do that, and you don't have a big enough pool of people to draw from. Plus you have people who oftentimes have a lot of other factors involved. How do we even draw meaningful numbers from that? Because we can say, well, bodybuilders do it. Yeah, a lot of bodybuilders die young and have massive health problems, but they also diet excessively, use excessive amounts of drugs, everything else. As far as the rest of the fitness community, how do you offset health risk if we do find them with the fact that they probably have much healthier lifestyles than the general population? Probably eat a lot of fruits and vegetables, particularly veggies, relatively clean diets, lift weights, do cardio. You know, so you have a demographic, at least multiple demographics with these other factors. It's going to be hard to draw meaningful conclusions, even if 20 years from now we start studying all these guys who've been consuming these massive amounts of protein. It's going to be a nightmare for anyone to dig through the multivariate analysis. So let's look at what the different concerns are that people have. And let's keep in mind, we do not have any long-term studies to prove that this is safe. We also don't have long-term studies to prove that it's dangerous. So what are the things that people usually talk about? Number one, maybe ultra-high protein increasing cancer risk. All right, that's a big one we talk about. Possible kidney disease. Excess protein converting into body fat. So let's talk about those a little bit. All right, excess protein turning into body fat. Doesn't happen. The human body, while the pathways are theoretically available for the human body to turn protein into fat, it would be very, very rare. It would be statistically unlikely for any significant portion of the protein that you personally eat, even if you're eating 400 grams a day, to store as body fat. The pathways are there, but they're relatively rarely used in the body. It's more likely that your body's going to convert it into glucose, burn it off as direct fuel by oxidizing protein, things like that. Those are far more likely. What do we have for evidence, though? Because that's hypothetical. That's hypothetical to say, well, it really shouldn't do it. And people would argue, well, if you're burning protein for fuel, you're storing more of other things you eat because you're burning that as a fuel source. Yeah, that's a possibility, but it's not on a calorie for calorie basis. And I remember there was one study done, and sorry I don't have it in front of me. If anyone wanted to find it, you guys could dig it up. Someone could link it below. There was a study done where they put people on ultra-high protein diets and put them into a small caloric surplus to see if they gained body fat. And I think it was something like they were eating like 2 grams of protein per pound of body weight. So that was the ultra-high protein group. So, I mean, you're talking about something like 400 grams of protein for a 200-pound guy. And then they had a baseline group on a normal high-protein diet, right, who were around maintenance calories. That was their baseline group. And they were eating something like 100 grams, maybe a bit more a day. Well, this other group, they went and added like 300 grams of extra protein a day to their diet. But these were people already on a balanced diet. They were on a balanced diet already. The conclusion, they didn't really gain significant body fat. When they added something like 300 grams of protein, we're talking about almost, I don't remember what it was. I don't remember off the top of my head, but these people were adding literally something like an extra 500 or 700 calories of protein every day to their diet to a normal maintenance compared to another group. What did they find? They didn't really gain extra body fat. The reason for that being the extra protein, yeah, some of it burned off as fuel, but protein tends to, in excess, be very thermogenic in the body. And in theory, people would say, well, maybe they should have stored some of the extra dietary fat they ate. Well, maybe in theory, that does sound right. That is what should happen. But what happens with protein? Protein is very satiating. People tend to get very full. A lot of people, if they're trying to eat 400 plus grams of protein a day, are going to struggle to get calories in. So what ends up happening, people's calories usually end up being lower than they think because it's very, very hard to overeat when you eat that much protein. So in that only study, the only explanation I can find for the no gain in body fat is that, number one, extra thermogenic effect, TEF, thermic effect of food, from the protein being oxidized. Even protein converting into carbohydrates burns calories off. It actually burns calories to go through that process. It's very metabolically expensive to do a lot of stuff with protein. And then they were probably getting full easier and pushing aside a little bit of extra bits, extra bites here and there of food because of how filling protein is. So the people ended up not gaining body fat in spite of the researchers trying to get them to overeat protein. We ended up with no body fat gain. In other words, a really high protein diet concerns that you're going to store it as body fat. Theoretically, doesn't look very plausible on paper. One big study that was done on it, they ended up not being able to really overeat enough to gain body fat. These active people, they didn't gain body fat. So that's interesting. So that one, we can throw that out the window. No body fat gain. As far as the cancer, that's a big topic, and that's one a lot of vegans and other people harp on is the cancer things. And we did have a study that showed, quite a big epidemiological study, if I recall, showed that older people, and I believe it was like the age 50 plus group, that the people who consumed very high protein diets had higher rates of cancer. And it was significantly higher. I think it was something like 25 or 30% higher. Well, at first, if you look at that and say, okay, that might be something. The only problem is that when we do multivariate analysis, there was another factor there. People in Western countries who eat a very high protein diet also tend to eat what? More processed meats, more fatty meats. It's already been released that, and I argued against this, but you know what? I'm just going to have to concede that maybe I was wrong. It may be processed meats with a lot of sodium nitrate and stuff in them. Processed meats do appear to be a carcinogen. That's what the data is saying. And so that's also what a lot of people who analyze this data said when they look at some of the multivariate analysis. They go, yeah, but the protein was correlational. It wasn't necessarily causative in this. When you look at that data, that there were extra carcinogens in the diets of the people, like extra bacon, right? Extra salami, all these extra refined and processed meats that we know, based on the other epidemiology, seem to be linked to higher cancer rates, are being consumed. These things are also these fattier cuts of meat, particularly fatty processed meats, also tend to contribute more to cardiovascular disease. So these people were eating other things with the protein. See the problem there? So the protein itself may not be to blame. It's difficult to say. And I'm taking this from the perspective of someone who thinks ultra-high protein diets are not a good idea. I don't think they're necessary for fitness. I don't think they're necessary for muscle gain. The cancer one is still up in the air. For the data that we do have on it, there seems to be alternative theories when multivariate analysis are done. It's not the protein itself, it's the other crap attached to it. It's the bacon they're eating, the sausage they're eating. The other things that tend to be in there in larger amounts. A lot of processed meats, a lot of extra saturated fat. These things can contribute. We know the osteoporosis one isn't true. There doesn't seem to be any link, and I know a lot of vegans and other people have tried to ascribe osteoporosis to high amounts of animal proteins. Actually turn out not to be true. People who eat large amounts of protein oftentimes have better bone density as a demographic. Now, how much of that is explained by resistance training? Because what percentage of people who eat really high protein diets lift weights? Much larger percentage than the general population. Therefore, that could possibly explain the improved bone density we see in some of these individuals, when we look at epidemiology. So that one, we're going to have to throw it out the window, though, because osteoporosis rates just don't seem to be higher in those people. But again, is that causative of other lifestyle effects that go hand in hand with it? It's possible. And it's probable, I would say that's a good explanation. But that would also suggest that even if the high protein diet might, for sedentary people, cause loss of phosphorus and from the bones, and that could again contribute to osteoporosis and bone demineralization, it seems to be completely offset. Even if it is there, it seems to be more than completely offset by the weight training. The people who eat higher protein diets, because of the percentage of them who weight train, as a group tend to have lower rates of osteoporosis. The weight training seems to stop whatever potential effect there is from it. So really, what is the other one we're going to look at? Kidney disease. You know what? It's been noted that that's a big concern, because people who have kidney disease or missing a kidney damage, if they eat high protein diets, they can damage your kidneys. These are also people with compromised kidneys. So it's generally accepted by the experts who've looked at it as like, look, high protein diets for people with healthy kidneys don't seem to harm their kidneys. And we can't even use bodybuilders for that, because why? How many competitive bodybuilders use diuretics and have destroyed their kidneys with potassium-sparing diuretics like Diazide? Diazide's well known for that in the bodybuilding community, damaging people's kidneys. It's done it for decades. Potassium-sparing diuretics, which help them drop water while still retaining some muscle fullness, tend to be really, really hard on your kidneys. They get abused by these individuals. They end up with kidney disease, so we can't use bodybuilders as the demographic. And it doesn't seem to be a problem, at least in the short term, but here's the only problem with that logic. We know that the extra nitrogen that gets cleaved off when we convert protein into glucose, and 50% or more of this high protein diets people are eating when they go really high, being converted into glucose. That puts nitrogen in your urine. Nitrogen does make the kidneys work harder. And while we could say, okay, high protein diets for people with healthy kidneys, we don't seem to see any negative effects on the kidneys. But how high a protein and for how long? That's looking at people eating a 200 gram of protein a day diet for a few years, don't seem to have problems. But what happens when you go to 400 or 500 and you double the nitrogen load on the kidneys? All right, we're talking absurd amounts of protein for no benefit. It might. We don't know, because it's not been studied. Well, a person could speculate and say, you know what, consuming that much protein for a prolonged period of time very well would put more strain on the kidneys. Is it going to be enough to cause damage? We can't say. We don't have data on it. So the question I come to with some of it, when we look at it in terms of saying, okay, well, we know you're not going to gain body fat from it. You know you're not going to get osteoporosis from it. That's a given. All right, that is a given. So we can throw those out. Our risks become, is there possible links to cancer? Maybe. Is there hypothetical risk of kidney damage when we start using very excessive amounts of protein, 400, 500 grams a day? Maybe. We don't know one way or another. It's a reasonable hypothesis to say, that very well could. So here's the question I have for people. Why consume that much protein? What's the benefit from it? We know people don't gain muscle. In fact, studies have been done on that. What have they found? People who are consuming 2+ grams per pound of body weight don't gain any more muscle than people consuming like 0.7 grams per pound of body weight. In other words, a 200-pound man, when the studies were done on this, and I remember a big study being done on this, on a weight training program to see who gained more muscle, neither group gained more muscle. The group who was eating like 140 grams of protein, weighing 200 pounds, 140, 150, gained just as much muscle as the guys eating over 300 grams. Okay? They gained just as much muscle. And I think that one study had pushed it way up. It might have been up over 400 grams for some of the people, and I can't remember the numbers, but it was really, really high. They didn't gain any more muscle or see any improved body composition off the lower protein group. So the question we get into, other than maybe for people who are using it for a short-term weight loss goal, which would be something you do in the short term, you wouldn't do that for a year, okay? You would do that for a short period of time, a few months. You might run an ultra-high protein diet to keep your appetite lower and help retain muscle when you start getting really, really lean. That might be the one possible benefit of it. But that's not something you would do for a prolonged period of time. And it's not something that you would do to be helpful for gaining muscle in any way, because the data doesn't show any improvement in muscle mass gains in most of the studies when people go on really, really high protein intakes. A normal high protein diet seems to get it done. So when you really look at it objectively, some of the risks we don't really know. And while in certain situations there are benefits, there are potential benefits to running a really, really high protein diet, for most people out there working out, they're not actually particularly practical for most of your long-term goals. They're not something you would ever do in the long term. And there are possible unknown, unproven risk and unproven safeties with doing it. So the question will become, why would you do that? What benefit do you think it would serve to do that to yourself? Potential risk with no trade-off, and it's going to cost you more money to eat that much protein. Alright guys, but that's really all I have to say on that today. I hope it's been informative, and I will talk to you guys next time.